So while people are just logging in, Paul, thank you so much once again for accepting our invitation. Great to have you with us. I did ask Paul, don't hold his usual provocative self back. Paul is going to take us through what he thinks are predictions 2021 for the pharma industry. Paul has been, as I think many of you know, has been involved with the pharma industry in one form or another for the last, what, Paul, 20 years or so?
Yeah, it's
Yep.
better not to count when it gets that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have been, one of the beneficiaries of seeing Paul on stage. I mean, the way that he conducts meetings and everything. And I always find it actually incredibly refreshing. Sometimes also I get a little bit afraid because some of the things he said, how can he say these things when he's standing on stage? But he does, which is great. So with much sort of further ado, I think why don't we just hand over to you? It's 13:03 at my end, and Christina, perhaps you can just. You said that he doesn't need to have the control; he can actually get into the control room himself, right?
I will accept them all.
Okay. Okay, Paul, over to you.
All right, guys. Thank you very much. Salman, obviously hugely appreciate this invitation from you. Also to Andre Bates, who introduced me to the group as well. Obviously, very happy to be part of it. Looking forward to what's going to be some great discussions. So, predictions 2021. By now, you've probably heard a lot of predictions from a lot of other people, which is good. I think we, as people in this industry, need to be prepared to put ourselves out a bit more. To be honest with you, that's why I do this. I think that particularly in the post-pandemic era, if we ever get there, none of us know what the world is going to look like. None of us can predict the future, but we have to be a bit more experimental and we have to try. So this is me putting myself out there. Eisenhower once said that plans are worthless, but planning is everything. So this is a case of simply bringing potential futures to you. And this isn't just, for fun. This is how budgets are set. This is how strategies are created. It's by having that view, that imagination and vision that we want of the future. So it's essential if we're going to be in control, we're going to be architects of our future rather than victims of the future, that we actually talk about it. So that's the point of today. I am not here to be right. Of course, at least half of my predictions, if not all of them, will be wrong. That's okay. I'm willing to put myself out there and be bold as I can. And I suppose my starting premise is this. People say COVID is just an accelerant, it's just made our digital plans come a little bit quicker to bear. I completely disagree. Think about the internet, for example. By the way, I'm getting some background noise. I think somebody might need to mute themselves. But it's absolutely clear to me that COVID is not just an accelerant in the same way that the internet, as it became more ubiquitous, as it became faster, we didn't just see AOL and GeoCities and all of these first internet companies become more dominant. We actually saw a whole new generation of companies become more dominant that actually took the new substrate, the digital substrate of ubiquitous and fast internet, and actually created brand new business models on top of it. So don't just assume that COVID has to just be a continuation of the future. It can be a lot more than that if you're willing to seize the opportunity with both hands. Okay, first prediction. Pharma buys love. Yes, and I know that gives you some interesting connotations. So I'm going to start by showing you a picture of a Ferrari. Why the hell am I doing that? Well, let's just imagine that I was somebody who lost a lot of money in my life. Maybe I started a new business, maybe something went wrong in my life and I lost all my money. If I did that, would the very next day I go out and buy a car like this, a Ferrari? Would I be able to go out and buy a car like this, a Ferrari? Well, of course I couldn't, even if I wanted to. But I believe that this is basically what the pharmaceutical industry is trying to get us all to do right now. Ferrari's mission is to create Italian excellence that makes the world dream. Okay, so it's obviously a very luxury brand. It's obviously targeted at a small number of people. And in actual fact, they're also incredibly profitable. It takes one Ferrari to make up 908 Ford cars in terms of the margins earned, just as a comparison. So as a company, it's managed to be very, very successful in terms of its margin. Let's compare Ferrari with pharma R&D, if you will, for a second. Ferrari clearly focuses on an exclusive and small population, as does pharma R&D these days. Our focus is increasingly on specialty medicines, orphan populations, rare diseases, because that's where we're going to get these kind of good margins. And indeed, both are high margin. Incredible engineering goes into a Ferrari, incredible science, incredible styling. The car itself, you can almost not fault it. It's the pinnacle of what many people want. And likewise, in pharma, with these incredible new generation of drugs, we've got amazing science coming out, curative immunotherapy, cell and gene therapies that, were science fiction really only a couple of years ago. And it is astounding what we can actually do. This is an object of desire, a Ferrari, and in a completely different way, an object of desire as well for a subset of patients who otherwise may not have had any treatment whatsoever. But then the key question is, can you afford it? And of course, Ferrari is unaffordable to most. They're never going to sell beyond the 1% of people, right? And pharma R&D also is unaffordable to most, yet for some reason, the whole industry is trying to make a Ferrari. The whole industry is trying to focus on this small segment of rare diseases and specialty medicines. And please don't for a second think that I'm saying that's not unworthy in any way. But is it where the need is and we can afford? Pandemic, the public purse is now at post-war debt levels. And by the way, made by one company, made by most companies. This is a quote from, not some socialist left-wing person, but a CEO of a significant pharma company. A lot of pharma companies have really generated so much of their growth recently from not only this focus on specialty, but also their focus on raising prices, because some of that innovation isn't coming through as readily as we might hope. This is the level of global debt that we feature in our world by the end of 2020. This is obviously a very, very large number that you almost can't comprehend. That's 12 zeros. But what it equates to is $37,000 per person in global debt. That's for every man, woman, and child in this world. Why is that a big number? Well, it's 432% of global GDP, and most frighteningly, it's a 50% increase since 2019 in the advanced nations. So this future that we've been dreaming of in our industry, this new dawn of cell and gene therapy, yes, from a scientific point of view, it is progressing beautifully. Can we afford it at the end of the day? I think that is under question these days. I'm lucky I managed to speak to this man very recently, a man who, of course, used to reside in Basel. This is Joe Jimenez from Novartis, and he said to me something which I haven't actually heard a pharma CEO say ever. He said the pharmaceutical industry's future success is for the first time actually not dependent on R&D. And that's the first time I've heard somebody say that we're not necessarily a science-centric industry, because what he was trying to illustrate is that it's those of us outside R&D who are going to have to sustain our industry over the next few years. It takes at least a decade for R&D to pivot. And it's absolutely essential that those of us outside of R&D step up and find the pockets of value that we can innovate and meet within months and maybe a small number of years as opposed to decades, because that is how we're going to sustain our industry. The money for so many of the medicines that we're hoping for over the next few years simply isn't going to be there. And you've even got to wonder whether it's ethical to be expecting to be able to. R&D is it's a juggernaut. It's big and it's powerful. Commercial can act more like a fleet of speedboats, the same number of people in them, but they can pivot and turn more quickly. So my belief is that when we start to see that the ability to gain market access on so many of these drugs is going to be somewhat stilted, that CFOs all around our industry are calling on us outside of R&D to really fill this gap. I mean, it's where the money is spent. Out of the $4 trillion annual US healthcare spend, 90% of it is spent on chronic disease and only 10% of it is spent elsewhere, according to the CDC. We have to be able, we look at, these large chronic disease areas and think that there's no innovation that we can apply to them because there's so much competition, because the science hasn't advanced. I think that's the wrong way of looking at things. I think that the potential of the large population is huge. And let's be clear, that's what people outside of the pharma industry, when they're trying to approach healthcare, that's what they think. They see the population, the wellness, and I'm going to talk about that a bit more. So maybe we need to stop worrying all the time about the chemistry on the left and start thinking a little bit more about the chemistry on the right. Of course, we'd love to have that beautiful image on the right, but the reality is that pharma doesn't have the DNA, and we're probably going to have to buy our way in. So that's why I say my first prediction is pharma buys love. I predict that before year end, there's going to be one pharma company that is actually going to acquire a more consumer-facing company in order to try and repair and establish a relationship with the direct patient. That doesn't mean that we're going to have a regulatory nightmare. I still think that these companies can remain separate in their entities, but I do think that pharma is going to have to make some serious investments here at the front end before other people take over the patient relationship, because that's where the patient is. Second one, and by the way, there will be opportunity for Q&A at the end of this. And I never said I was right. Unconscious wellness is the second one. That might sound like a paradoxical statement, so let me explain what I mean. So let's just think about YouTube, for example. That's a website which I'm sure everyone's familiar with. It's pretty damn easy, you've got to admit. Pretty much any video you want, you just got to search for it, type it in, whatever it is. So easy, right? Well, no, not if the whole idea of knowing what content it is that you want to look for, of having to search for it, of having to actually type, that's just way too much effort, isn't it? So that's why you get something like this, TikTok. TikTok is an app which I hope many of the people listening here have familiarized themselves with, although it's a little bit of a rabbit hole if you accidentally get into it. But it's essentially feeding you automatically videos one after one after one. And as you swipe past them, the algorithm learns what you like and what you don't like. So it understands what the future videos that you should be served should be, because it's learning your preferences. So it's a far more passive, a far more automatic way of actually serving you with what you want. Google's former CEO, Eric Schmidt, described TikTok as the most entertaining 15 seconds of your life over and over and over again, which is why it can be a bit of a rabbit hole. So now let's think about commerce, e-commerce, and the buying of things. Imagine if we look at Amazon, that Amazon is the equivalent to YouTube today. You have to know what you're looking for. You have to know what you're buying. You have to search for it and have a need for it in your life. Well, imagine that Amazon decided that instead of you searching stuff, they've actually learned enough about you. They've been seeing your search preferences for a while. They've been listening to your Alexa recordings, blah, 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 blah. They've started to know who you are as a person. Instead of actually waiting for you to order, why don't we just give you the stuff? And in fact, why don't we give you the stuff on a Monday, and then when we come to collect the box the following Monday and give you new stuff, we'll see what you didn't use, and that will train our algorithm better and better and better to understand what it is that you actually want. This is a phenomenon known as algorithmic commerce, or e-commerce, and it's already being seen in many areas, and it's already being pioneered in many areas. The TikTok example is one. Why is that? It's because, unfortunately, situations where you're polygamous, as is shown in this picture, where you shop around and you work with multiple people, it's not a good business model for you to be in. It's far more profitable for you to be in a monogamous relationship with a single retailer, a single seller, and that's what companies want from you. They want you to be in this single monogamous relationship. Adobe is a perfect example of that. When they moved their products from retail purchase to subscription purchase, They went from 10% subscription to 90% prescription. The stock market actually rewarded them from a 4 times earnings to an 18 times earnings in terms of the value of the company. Apple has recognized that iPhone sales are slowing down as a proportion of revenue. So what has it done? It's increased its service output. It's increased its subscriptions. So it's gone from 10 to 22% just in the last 12 months, from 2019 to 2020, actually. And the market has rewarded them in that time from going 15 times earnings to 30 times earnings. Think about a Disney. Disney is a company that should have been decimated in the pandemic. It relied on people going to the cinema and it relied on people going to theme parks. But actually, its stock is up double. Why? Disney Plus. It's actually done very, very well as a subscription service. Reward people to stake in the that, you know, others coming in. Okay, I'm going to close my video. I've just done that now. Can you still see my slides or not?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hopefully this is better. The good news is I'm actually recording this. We can maybe superimpose. Where I was saying was, how much data do you want to actually receive? Do you need to be able to really interpret or understand information to be actually able to respond to this data? I found out that the distance between steps that I have is 73 centimeters. What does that mean? Is that going to improve that? Just like the move to algorithm, we're going to see a move towards algorithmic wellness. In other words, past where we don't just see the data and the graph, we essentially see the recommendation. That's what we want to do. We need to eat something different. We need to sleep different.
I'm sorry. I think still you're cutting off. I don't know what others also experience the same problem.
That's right.
Let me hear from others.
Yeah,
Yeah, same here.
Sorry? I'm not sure what to do as I'm connected to my Wi-Fi, and my Wi-Fi is usually pretty good. But shall I continue, or shall I try logging in again? I'm very happy to take a time out for 2 minutes and restart and that kind of thing.
To me, it's much better now. I don't know about the rest.
Yeah, now it's better.
I know how painful it is to listen to somebody when you can't hear them properly. Let's hope it stays. If it stops again, then just let me know, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so the last point I was going to make here is that so many of these algorithmic companies that work on these subscription bases, the products actually improve with time, a little bit like Benjamin Button. They get younger and more youthful and more athletic over time, and that's because of the network effect and the algorithmic effect. So bringing people into these virtuous circles of subscription models actually helps you refine the quality of your product over time and personalize and keep hold of your customer. So algorithmic wellness is going to become a phenomenon. And of course, I'd love to see pharma taking part in that, perhaps in some way. The third one is vaccine nationalism exposes pharma's ugly side. Okay, I'm sure you've all become familiar with the phrase vaccine nationalism of late. And it's true that we as pharma companies are somewhat basking in the glory right now of having come up with an incredible vaccine in just 10 months. And I have to say to the people working on the front line, it has been truly incredible, and they have done amazing work to get this far. But I also think the rest of our industry is somewhat hiding behind the good efforts of some of our colleagues, and we haven't necessarily made the sort of overhauls that we could have done during this period. And in particular, we've obviously seen Donald Trump and now even Joe Biden in the last 24 hours signing a hell of a lot of these things, these executive orders. And there is a significant effort to try and make pricing. Pricing has been a huge thing for us in our industry for a long time, but actually you could say that as a result of the various election processes and the needs of the vaccine, that pricing has come off the agenda recently. And you might think, well, lucky Pharma, we've got pricing off the agenda for a bit. We can maybe carry on for another year or two without having to really think about this or change anything significant. And I think that's wrong. I think that vaccine nationalism is actually going to reveal what we have done, which is actually take a very protected approach to our vaccine. And we already know that there are insufficient supplies for the developing world. There have been huge efforts to try and improve that. But pharma companies have not been willing to share their IP to enable other organizations to be able to create and manufacture that. And that's perhaps because they do intend to make this into a commercial effort in the future. And I think that this is being recognized very strongly, and it's one of those news stories that doesn't just go away. It actually builds and builds and builds as the situation becomes worse and worse and worse. And there's already been a huge backlash from many organizations, starting with a lot of major charities and the WHO, of course, with its COVAX efforts trying to institutionalize this. But there's already an underswell of backlash against our industry for being far too protective over this vaccine rollout. And I think that we're going to see a few problems coming out our way. We're not going to create the wonderful long-term reputational benefits that we want to do unless we actually take our commercial hands off the COVID-19 vaccines a little bit more effectively than we have done so far. Fourth one, Pharma leaps to a Web 2.0 model. Can you hear me all right, people?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, great. Okay, good. Consultants, we often talk about Pharma 3.0, Pharma 4.0. I think that actually a lot of people do this simply to, sell consulting services and reports and that kind of thing. The truth is we are nowhere near Pharma 3.0 at all. We are still effectively stuck on Web 1.0, the equivalent. So I regard Web 1.0, as I was saying earlier, as kind of the companies you see on the left-hand side. And the companies you see on the right-hand side have kind of taken over, haven't they? You don't really see Netscape and Alta Vista and GeoCities anymore, but you definitely see all of these Web 2.0 companies. They've really replaced them. And what's the difference between 1.0 and 2.0? I would say that a 2.0 business model can only exist online. A 1.0 business model was effectively just taking something that was offline and making it online. Just a translation. And that's really where we still are as Pharma. All we've done is we've taken processes that used to happen offline and we've put them online. We haven't come up yet with the digital-only business models yet. And we all know that Uber doesn't own the cars, Airbnb doesn't own the properties, Google doesn't own the websites, et cetera, et cetera. These platform businesses are effectively middlemen between two sets of people. Why on earth am I telling you all of this? What has this got to do with pharma industry? Well, believe it or not, we are starting to see this business model emerging within pharma. And I'm really excited because I sort of came up with this concept about 3 years ago, and it's only now that we're starting to see it emerge. So imagine you're a biotech company, right? And you've got a very high-performing candidate, a new drug, which you want to release to the market. At the moment, you've only got two options. You either sell out, in other words, you sell your major drug or you sell your company to a big pharma company. They've got the presence already to be able to take advantage. Or if you're brave, or if you think your candidate is truly incredible, you go it alone. You build your own commercial department. You take on that huge risk, and you have to start investing, of course, even before you've had market approval in many places. Which one of these directions do you take? In my opinion, neither, because they're both pretty crap, if I'm honest with you. Neither of these options are great. I think that there's a third way, and a third way is a Web 2.0 style business model. In other words, Think of it a bit like the App Store. There will be a new company that operates a little bit like the Apple App Store, where it's free to put your app in the App Store, but then as you sell that app, 30% of it is taken by the App Store owner. And this business model doesn't really exist in pharma. Imagine there was a company which said, I will commercialize your medicine, but don't pay me any money for it upfront. I don't want any fees upfront. Instead, I'm going to take something from the future commercial gains that you actually create. And that is a perfectly viable business model. In fact, I think it's a better business model than what exists today, because when we pay fee for service, we are not necessarily aligned to the same success factors as the pharma company is. If a pharma company pays a CRO, does a CRO want to charge for services, or does a CRO want to charge for success in the market? Well, typically it just charges for its services. So by having this App Store type model, and I realize an App Store is a vastly oversimplified version, you actually got alignment between all the parties involved. And I believe that you're going to see this. In fact, you already have. Some of you might be familiar with this company. On the one hand, it might look like a traditional management consultancy, but this company has managed to make deals with multiple biotech founders and is actually handling the entire commercialization for them. And it's doing so at risk. It's doing so without asking for very much money up front. This year, Eversana plans to launch between 9 and 13 drugs. That is an order of magnitude greater than big pharma companies typically manage. So I think this is going to be an absolute breakthrough year for this kind of business model. And of course, if Eversana manages to make a success of it, then don't be surprised if IQVIA and Viva and all of these people take an interest. But let's be honest, it's going to be very difficult for them to actually follow suit and be able to reorganize a business model accordingly. So expect Eversana, if it works, to actually become a significant force in the future, and expect, of course, new players to come on board offering this 2.0 model. Perhaps these new players will be coalitions of lots of smaller companies that are willing to operate in this manner. So next one, digital health kills telemedicine. That sounds, again, a little bit crazy, because telemedicine is a brand new thing, right? Or at least it's become just popular recently. Well, sort of. I mean, telemedicine, it went up to, in some countries, over 90% of physician visits for obvious reasons at the start of the pandemic. But it hasn't actually sustained itself. In some of those same countries, it's fallen way back now, down to below 40% and even 30% in some countries. And that's because telemedicine is great for, being able to talk to a doctor, but it's not great for being able to be examined, or to be able to, for the doctor to really see, feel, hear, and touch you properly. And yeah, communication through an interface like this is not necessarily good enough for the future of healthcare. So I believe that although we've seen an impressive growth to this, and actually this is reflected in the share prices of many telemedicine companies. They shot up by 100% in some cases, but actually they've flatlined or even declined over the last 6 months. So telemedicine won't go anywhere. It's not going to disappear, of course not. And it's going to be far more dominant than it was back in 2019. But it's not going to be the pervasive phenomenon that I think that many people are thinking it might be. Of course, it's going to be more of a hybrid situation, where the blue visits on this timeline are the in-person visits, and the orange T's are telemedicine. It's going to be a hybrid approach where some communication is moved online, but some of it is not. And the reality is that there's so much in the digital health world which actually allows a far greater understanding of a condition than telemedicine does. So got some noise there. I predict that we'll see a big improvement in digital health, which I shall show in a minute. Only a few years ago, the industry with the lowest NPS, Net Promoter Score, was cable TV. And what happened to that? Well, we got overtaken by this man and a range of other people, with Netflix providing a far superior user experience, even though they don't offer the same range of titles that we had before. User experience trumps everything. What is the industry with the lowest NPS score today? Well, it's, surprise, surprise, healthcare. And also, they are the largest industries as well. So it has become, and I don't like using this word always, but it's become a very disruptable industry. It's become very attractive to a lot of people because of the high margins that we've created in this industry with very low corresponding improvements in NPS. In fact, there isn't an industry that has increased its prices as much as ours has without any corresponding increase in NPS, except for maybe education, which hasn't changed very much recently, but certainly healthcare is right up there. And as a result, digital health funding has not relaxed during 2020 at all. In fact, it's up to an all-time high. But what I think is most interesting is that the average deal size within digital health has actually gone up by 50% in the last year, which shows, in my opinion, a far greater degree of confidence according to each deal. I also think that we're going to see a significant effect in the world of enabling technologies. This is a device made by a company called Enable Injections, which allows patients to self-inject and to take medicines that otherwise would have to taken in the hospital at home. And of course, it does inject you, but you never get exposure to the needle. It gives you a readout on an app as to just how well the infusion of the medicine is going. This is obviously a subcutaneous formulation, but expect that we're going to see a far greater proliferation of devices which are designed to not necessarily be digital health, but certainly to move healthcare into a home environment going forward. Okay, number 6, and I've got how long left? About 5 minutes, so I think we're okay. Number 6 is Amazon wins healthcare as a side gig. What the hell do I mean by that? Well, don't be distracted, basically. 2 weeks ago, you saw the story of the big health insurance organization, which was put up by Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, and JP Morgan, having the plug pulled on it. It was called Haven. And the reason for that is not because it was a bad idea to go into health insurance. The reason for that is because one of those companies has greater ambitions than the other two, and it created a massive disruption and a lack of an equal partnership as they tried to make this happen. What was that one company? I think you probably have guessed already from the previous title. It was Amazon. Amazon has got a obviously very heavy share price, currently trading at about $1.7 trillion. In order to justify that share price, they need to be able to grow by 2025 to pretty much double the size that they are now. That means they need to find an extra $217 billion in revenue. Where are they going to find that from? Exactly the same place that I spoke about before, healthcare. It's not whether or not they are or if they're going to move into healthcare. They have to move into healthcare. They have no other choice because their shareholders have dictated that that's what they need to do. I want you to think for a moment about Prime Video. How does Prime Video make Amazon money? Just think about it. Most people are already Prime members, and Prime Video is not the reason why they become Prime members in most cases. Okay, they're trying to do that a little bit, but it's not generally the reason. So they spend all of this money on TV content and, rivaling Netflix. Why the hell do they do that? Well, the answer is quite simply to make Prime membership stickier. They want to keep you as a Prime member, and they're willing to featureize the entire video service. What I mean by that is, they're offering the entire video thing as just an added extra, a bonus, a small feature on the bottom of what it is that Amazon Prime actually offers. They've effectively killed an entire industry by offering it for free in many ways. And that's the sort of thing that you can do when you have 82% of people actually being Prime members as they are or having access to Prime membership as they do in the US. This is the largest buying club. There are more people who are Amazon Prime members than put up a Christmas tree or voted in the last election. And you're more likely to break up with your marriage partner than you are to break up with Amazon Prime. So it is absolutely a crucial part of so many people's lives going forward. And the interesting thing about Amazon as a company is they've got many, many strengths. Here's a list of some of the ones that you might consider to be their strengths. Which one of these is really the biggest strength is my question for you. I mean, when you look at a list, you could say many of these things. I think it's this one. It's their storytelling ability, which is perhaps not the obvious one that anybody thinks of. But Amazon is a company which has effectively managed to get an entire set of shareholders to believe it never needs to really make a profit. It's the only large company that's ever been able to do that. And it's been able to do that through amazing storytelling, not the storytelling that you see on the consumer end, which is quite good as well, but the storytelling that it tells to shareholders and the sort of things that you see in Jeff Bezos's annual letters. A very good example of that was actually very recently in 2020, when Jeff Bezos said to investors, if you're an investor in Amazon, you may want to sit down. Why did he say that? Because people were expecting Amazon to make loads and loads and loads of money as the pandemic started. It was the perfect environment for Amazon, with every other store closed and only e-commerce being able to thrive. But actually, Jeff said, no, the $4 billion extra revenue you were expecting, we are spending it. We are spending it on securing our supply chain. We are spending it on PPE for our employees. We're spending it on actually investing in the number of employees. Amazon have actually been recruiting 4,500 people every single day since the pandemic began. They've doubled their workforce from 600,000 to 1.2 million during that time. And they have basically got themselves in a far better position than they were in previously, using the pandemic as the ability to do that. And I think that this is very prescient type of thinking. And it's the kind of thing that actually gives Amazon the ability to do so many other things. They effectively have free money from their investment community, or very cheap capital, to be able to run things like Prime Video and, in the future, healthcare at very low cost or even free. And it might allow a company like Amazon to featureize the basic healthcare service that they provide. They don't even have to charge money for it in the short term, at least on the basic level. It's very easy to see where Amazon actually spends its money. This is a fake profit and loss chart, but it's designed to illustrate that basically Amazon just makes its expenses into business lines. The perfect example of that is, of course, AWS, when it first started, turning storage into something that could be available to any company. They basically generate a competency out of something that any other company would outsource. The next thing, of course, is delivery. They are now offering their delivery services to other companies because Amazon's delivery is better than FedEx, and it's better than anyone else's delivery because they've established such a strong network. So it's really easy to see that healthcare, which is a major expenditure in the US on Apple employees, is going to be where Apple spends its money. So you should not be surprised when Apple invests in Amazon Care and all of the rest of it and creates Amazon Prime Health, because that's what it does. And it has historically repeatedly done that every year for the past 25 years of its existence. And as you can see, its ecosystem is now enabling it to do that far better than anybody else. I would argue that Amazon knows more about you than Google does. Why? Because your purchases tell you a huge amount about what you really care about. In addition, they have the Whole Foods market and other kind of food services, so they know what you eat. They've branched into health trackers. They have Alexa, which doesn't necessarily listen to your individual conversations, but it certainly listens to your aggregated conversations and be able to understand that. They've got Amazon Pay, which allows lots of platforms to understand what you're spending your money on, even outside of Amazon. And then, of course, they have your search preferences. Amazon is actually the largest, third largest search engine in the world after Google and YouTube. So they've got a huge amount of information and data and understanding. So it's not surprising that we're going to see a link up between Amazon Prime, Amazon Pharmacy, and Amazon Care coming into our homes. It's an inevitability, but it's going to be featureized rather than a service that you necessarily even have to pay for initially. How does Pharma work with this? Well, it's very hard to compete with Amazon, in the same way that it's very stupid if you try to create an e-commerce company anymore, because they are so dominant. But the key here is partnership. The key here is understanding and working with. Amazon is clearly going to own the consumer interface, and in my opinion is way ahead of even Apple and Google and other big tech companies on this front. So the best thing that you can do is to actually welcome it in and be prepared to treat them as a partner as the consumer becomes actually more and more important and their preference becomes more important going forward. And R&D is not as defensible as it once was, as I said earlier in this presentation. Final one, and I realize that we haven't got much time left, is Pharma removes its mask. What do I mean by that? Well, I think this was a perfect example when Pfizer released its vaccine results and its approval results. And I felt that they actually did their communication in a really, really strong way that humanizes the organization. I think that the fact that you saw an outpouring on social media from the various employees at Pfizer, rather than simply relying on a bland press release or a corporate statement, unlocked this need to have people believe in the medicine. Communication is so important. We already know from all of the hesitation that we see over vaccines that seeing the human behind the medicine creation is becoming far more important. And this new spotlight that we have on our industry is not necessarily going to disappear with the pandemic. So I'm very much in favor of this. I've been trying to encourage our healthcare leaders to take off their masks, stop hiding behind their corporate exterior, and for the first time actually talk about the future of our industry as opposed to just the past or the recent past. Because we have to inspire people to join our industry, we have to inspire people to see what's possible, and we have to be great storytellers, just as I illustrated that Amazon has managed to be, if we are going to ensure that the value of our industry continues in the same way that it has done. I was going to end with a final few things, but I think I'm actually running out of time. So, Salman, do you want to move it over to Q&A rather than me wittering on any longer? I'm very happy to witter on if you want, but I want to be...
Thank you so much, Paul.
I'm just going to flick through these slides.
Thank you so much. You will, of course, be sharing these slides later on, hopefully.
Of course.
Yeah. I think, let's move on to some Q&A, and if anybody would like to stay on beyond the allotted time that we have, which is 13:50, 1:50, can be a couple of minutes above that, then Paul has in fact agreed generously to stay on and answer any further questions. So Paul, my first question to you, if I may just kick off, thank you so much for some sobering thoughts. You mentioned a couple of things. You said that you expect the pharma industry, or at least a big pharma company, acquiring a consumer product company by the end of this year. My question is, do you actually think that the likes of Amazon, for instance, that they would acquire a big pharma company instead?
I don't think that's going to happen in 2021 because I don't think that there's any great advantage to Amazon for doing that. And of course, Amazon is one of the few companies, and the big tech companies are one of the few sets of companies that might actually have the free capital to be able to do such a thing. But I don't see it's in their best interest because so much of healthcare is moving towards the consumer. And I think that the prize is, we of course, we call ourselves science-centric companies. We say science will win all the time. But the truth is that we are becoming more consumer-centric companies. And there are so many dollars to be earned on the wellness and preventative side of our industry, which pharma has not managed to make gains in. People always say, prevention, there's no business model there. I think that is crap. I think that there are far more people in the world who are well than are sick. And that if, it's just simply not in pharma's DNA to be able to create models for wellness and for healthcare. We simply don't know how to do it. Yes, to be fair, the regulatory environment and the market access environment don't allow us to create preventative medicines outside of the typical vaccine and communicable disease, infectious diseases areas. But I think that the big tech companies, they see plenty of dollars in expanding fitness services, in helping people to navigate this space, educational services. They don't need to buy a big pharma company to be able to earn the huge margins available to them in healthcare in the short term.
Okay, thank you. Questions from the floor?
Yeah, this is Yariv. Maybe one question from me, Paul. So again, you mentioned in your last answer the regulatory barriers, right? So I think when we look at your presentation, which was excellent, by the way, we see all these dynamics that happens in other industries. I think when we look at the other industries, the barriers to entry in terms of regulation are significantly lower than they are in pharma. And I think pharma itself is struggling today with the level of regulation in terms of its ability to innovate and to go into new spaces. So where do you see the break point of us as pharma or the technology companies being able to overcome those barriers and really going into this 2.0 or 2.3 phase that you're talking about?
Okay. So, by the way, Paul, before you answer that, I just should say that Yariv Hafiz is somebody with a lot of experience in mainly in big pharma, but also in some specialized pharma companies. So I'm happy to see that he's Yariv, that you're on the call. And of course, I mean, you are also
excellent talk, by the way.
you're also provocative, which is what I mean. We've known each other for a long time, and that's one of the things I like also about Yariv. So please go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. When it comes to drug development, there is no easy answer. Of course, the strategy is work in partnership with the regulators as far as possible. And I'm pleased to obviously see that so many of the regulators, in particular the FDA, have been far more willing to do that of late. And I think that we are going to see an evolution in the role of the FDA. It's not actually yet a completely independent organization from the US government. And we may well see some change on that front, given the headlines that have been created in the past 12 months. But interestingly, I'm working with one major pharma company right now on creating a virtual healthcare initiative, which is not drug dependent. And yes, that sounds like a weird and wonderful thing, and it kind of is. But it's amazing how when you take the drug out of the equation, how much of the regulatory landscape actually opens up and the ability to do so much more. We talk about being patient-centric all the time in our industry, but actually we give lip service to it most of the time. If we were truly patient-centric, then we'd start with the patient and work backwards rather than starting with the medicine and working forwards, which is what we traditionally do. So I think that the way in which pharma companies can perhaps see some movement on the regulatory side is to actually begin by engaging the patient populations that they have outside of the medicine, maybe with a view to the future pipeline, of course, but simply engaging them on that front and being able to do so much with them before it comes to actually the necessity of involving a drug where, of course, you have all of the promotional and access hurdles that you need to overcome. So your question, I feel like, can be answered in two ways. There's the practical way of working in concert with the regulators, but there's also the attitudinal way. And I think it's the attitudinal one that we have the greatest movement to make. And as I've just said to you, I'm already working with one pharma company on doing it. So it is absolutely possible to take a much more free approach in this way. That doesn't mean that, of course, you compromise patient safety. In fact, the exact opposite is true. In this situation, we're listening to the patient even more than we ordinarily would. So I don't know if that is a panacea. It certainly doesn't wave the magic wand for so many people listening to this conversation. I realize that it's very easy for me to talk and much easier to take action, but it absolutely is an attitudinal thing as much as it is a practical one.
Okay, thank you. Evrim has a question in the chat box. She's asking, where do you think personalized healthcare will go in 2021?
Personalized healthcare is already a reality in so many ways, but not in so many other ways. I think we actually have to scale down our ambitions slightly. Personalized healthcare, the ability to genetically modify medicines according to an individual patient is still many years away, unless you're talking about the hugely expensive cell and gene therapies. I think that we need to be able to personalize medicine in simple forms, such as dosing. How much of the medicine does the patient actually get? Really simple things that you can actually learn from using consumer devices in some cases, or some really quite basic AI connecting various different data sources together. And I think that we have to maybe reset our ambitions to do some simple things better, as opposed to trying to reinvent the wheel and create one-to-one sophisticated medicine personalization. I think that also so many of the gains to be made in personalizing medicine are the gains that are not necessarily scientific gains, but gains elsewhere, and just in terms of the system and the processes that we use to get medicines to people and have them take it. The enabling technology that I showed a picture of earlier from Enable Injections, that's one very, very good example. That device can report on so many aspects of the patient as they take their medicine, even from their home, and decisions can be made that are personalized just based on that. So that's what I think.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the liberty perhaps of just asking one colleague who I hope is still on the line. Behzad, are you there?
Yes.
So we have many actually very interesting colleagues on the line, but somebody whom I know has done quite a bit of work, has created a passion of putting the patient first and the patient journey, what you refer to, Behzad. I wonder if you have any questions to Paul with respect to patient journey, which I think you and your clients are very passionate about. And I'm just wondering if we're getting any closer to what should really be an ideal, or are we getting further away from it?
Yeah, interesting, right? I think it starts first with the confusion of what a patient journey is, which we regularly see when we talk to customers in the healthcare environment, right? And I think, Paul, you just said something interesting about what's a lip service, right? Putting patients first versus actually looking at the medicine. The impression, I'm not sure if it's a question, but just an observation in this regard is that when we talk about the need to develop a patient journey, we still largely see that is being driven by the need to, again, commercialize better, to understand how can we sell our product better, which of course is fair, right? I think in the end of the day, money needs to be made, and that's perfectly okay in a lot of ways. But what we sometimes miss is really to understand where is the patient really in this view, right? And how can we as an organization maybe really ensure that we help the patient to maybe have better access to the product, or to get faster access to the product, or similar types of considerations. And we feel that those typically fall short, and it loops back to the question, okay, where is the biggest barrier that we have to kind of overcome to actually sell our product? So sorry, I'm not sure if it's a question. It's just something that when Paul was talking about that lip service about patient centricity, it just reminded him exactly of this point that, again, we regularly see when we talk and work on patient journey work.
Yeah, I've got a good friend called Anne Najjar. She works for AbbVie. She said something to me back in December. She said, if the patient stops taking your medicine, do you still care about them? And for most pharma companies, the answer to that would be no. And I think that probably illustrates your point that we only care about the patient when they're taking our medicine. We don't really care about them at other times very often. And the problem with so much effort in patient centricity, which, by the way, I've been talking about patient centricity since 2004, it's kind of driven by people who care, that people are compassionate. And the problem is that it needs to be driven by people who don't care, because if it's driven by people who care, then we almost have to rely on the good nature of people in the future. And we can't rely on that. Who knows who's going to be running our departments in the future? We need to effectively systemize the incorporation of patient preferences, patient needs within the system, so that it doesn't matter who comes along, and that the, I'm going to use the word ROI, which is kind of a taboo word when it comes to patient engagement. But we need to be able to see those returns for those skeptics that are within our organizations. And unless those things are inbuilt, we're never really going to make much progress. We'll all be relying on the good-heartedness of the few employees that we have. So that's what I think needs to change on that regard.
Okay. So Ian has a question. It's actually a very broad question. Ian is asking, how can Europe get back the dominance in healthcare innovation back from the US? I mean, I have some comments on that and an opinion, but what do you think, Paul?
Well, the obvious question would be to have drugs sold for higher prices, which is not necessarily one that we want to see as patients or consumers or taxpayers. So I think that the real answer to this is regulatory harmony. I'm not a big fan of Brexit. I think it's going to cause more problems than it creates, because I'd like to see greater harmonization so that people can see Europe as a great launch market for new products, a great place for innovation. And the fact that it's still, 26 member states and a few others outside of the EU as well, that each require a slightly different approach, different measurement protocols. The greater harmonization is better. And so I actually applaud the various EU initiatives that are trying to do that. Of course, the metrics are going to stay the same. Germany is not going to measure using the QALY in the same way that the UK does. But there are a lot of more commonalities than there have to be differences. So I think that pharma can play a role here. It needs to play an educational role. It needs to play a harmonization role. It needs to bring the right people to the table for the right kind of conversations. I think that we as pharma companies do terribly badly when it comes to doing things like creating digital biomarkers, which we should be doing in partnership with other pharma companies rather than standalone as single organizations. It is stupid to go in as one organization and expect a payer to simply say yes. Unless we actually can come with as a coalition and create a new standard of care, a new measurement criteria that is going to be adopted across the industry by multiple players, then it's not going to take root. It's not going to take hold. It's going to be an uphill battle, and it's going to be a lot more expensive. So we do shoot ourselves in the foot by our lack of imagination on this front, I believe.
Interesting. So we have another member who's joined from the US, Arthur Mendonca. Arthur, are you there? I wonder if Arthur can hear us.
Hi, Salman, I'm here.
Hi, Arthur. Arthur, you have an interesting affiliation with a company, with Galapagos. And I just wonder, from what Paul has been sharing with us, how do you see that? Arthur is with a company called Galapagos, which I think most of us know. And they had an alliance, or have an alliance, with Gilead, which was very interesting. Is that a kind of an alliance that we are likely to see more of? Or Arthur, do you want to ask another question in that respect?
No, thanks, Salman. No, I do believe that we will see more of these alliances from the European side with the US companies, just because I think there is some expertise in the US-based companies that is lacking in the European side, mainly on the commercial front, where, I think we still struggle in Europe in terms of commercializing on a global scale. And it's to some of the points that Paul just mentioned about harmonization, etc. And it makes the market quite inefficient in the way we operate today in Europe versus the US being one big chunk of market, and obviously China coming up as well. So I think we will see more of these collaborations from the smaller biotech or mid-sized biotech from Europe, leaning towards the US-based companies. And I wouldn't be surprised if even the Chinese companies, the big ones with deep pockets, get involved with that, because obviously some of that incentive in terms of equity backing is missing in Europe.
Yeah. So we have a couple of sessions coming up. One of them is going to be actually specifically on China and Chinese companies. Another one is going to be on alliances. So I won't say further on that, but I think, yes, you're right. I think, Paul, we will likely see, because I don't think the choice is there, we will likely see more strategic alliances also forming in 2021.
Yeah, I'm fortunate enough to have even been asked to help create some of them, just because I'm obviously not aligned to any one company and be asked. So I absolutely see that there is going to be a greater opportunity. This is, never waste a good crisis. This is one of those things that we can create now better than we ever could create before, is a greater coalition making, and it's certainly what patients at the end of the day would like to see from us.
Okay, so there's one question from, and I'm again conscious of time, it's just gone after 2:00, but there's one question from a member. To what extent can preventive medicine be integrated into pharma, or is it rather a pure competitor? I'm not quite sure I fully understand that. The person who asked the question, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, hello. Hi, this is Christoph. Hi, Salman.
Hi. Sure.
Excellent presentation, Paul, and I realized that you also have a strong focus on preventive medicine rather than treating patients. So when we talk about patient centricity and all that, I really wonder if there is no more patients any longer or fewer, then this will be cannibalizing basically the basis.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
see those two industries going along together, maybe as competitors. What is your perspective there?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that comes quite often from the world of the consumer world, who basically assume that pharma companies are keeping everybody sick because that's where the business is. And I think we have to get rid of that. I think that there are plenty of ways of making money on the preventative side. Yes, as I've already said, the regulatory environment makes it far harder to bring preventative medicines outside of the vaccines and infectious diseases areas to light. But I don't think that actually the world is small enough. I think it's a scarcity mindset. It's like, if I take one thing, then I'm taking away from you. That's the sort of thing we have in the insurance industry, where they don't have a particularly wonderful reputation either. I think we need to have an abundance mindset, that if you invest in preventative, there will firstly still be plenty of patients who are not there yet. We have a big world and a lot of patients in it. And I think that actually there's going to be new opportunities that arise around the corner if we take this more proactive and positive mindset of being able to invest on the preventative side. I think it's very closed-minded to worry so much about losing your ground to preventative competitors. I mean, it's a bit like saying nobody should go to the gym, nobody should eat healthily, because that's going to stop diabetes medicine from being as prevalent as it should. And I don't think that argument stacks up very well. And it's the kind of thing that actually gives us a bad reputation as an industry.
Okay, we have one question from our colleague Sanya. Sanya, do you want to ask your question? You raise your hand.
Yes, I did. Thank you very much, Salman. Paul, it has been an excellent, presentation and very provocative. I just have a question, and it goes in the same direction as a lot of other questions and your own proposal that we should invest into preventive care. What about digital biomarkers? That's the space to go. But maybe, what is missing, certainly, it is a real framework for this to happen. I don't think that pharma has been ignorant to all these partnerships that have to extend with the consumer-focused companies. I mean, that has been around for a very long time. I think what is missing is really having a framework, both pricing-wise and regulatory, that can put this in place. So maybe since you're starting a project, it could be, with another company, could be a good example, to give a direction. How can that really happen, literally? Because I think this is where the biggest barrier is. It's maybe not the culture. You're convinced it's the culture, and you probably are exposed to that much more customers and companies. But I don't think it's the culture. It's just that there is no example and a clear, way forward.
Well, I think there's only two places that this kind of can come from. It can either come from the payer community itself, or it can come from industry. And of course, industry as a single company can propose these kind of models and ways of thinking to payers, and it often does when it presents dossiers and value propositions to them. I think that it doesn't hold very much weight when you come as a single company to a payer to do this. Payers, I just practically don't think they have the time, budget, imagination, or future vision of what healthcare can be to actually create the frameworks themselves. We actually have to help them. But if we do so as a coalition, if we do so perhaps with our partners like FPIA and organizations that already pull together our industry, then I think we have a much higher degree of success. And we have to look to be concessionary, not just entirely self-serving when we create these frameworks. We have to be doing them with an objective of better health, ultimately, as opposed to just better profits. So I do think there is more that we can do, despite what you say. And I do think it just requires a little bit more lateral thinking to be able to get there. I, for example, started to put together at the end of last year an organization of chief digital officers, because they never talk to each other. Even though we work in a more digital world right now, there was no real communication. If you compare it to the R&D heads who created Transcelerate, and they talk all the time, and they even some of the alliances that happened around COVID came as a result of these kind of relationships. We have so far to go. So I think that the industry coalitions and the ability for us to work together are really lacking at the moment when it comes to so much of this access and value frameworks that you're describing.
A clear value proposition. I agree. I mean, it has to be put in place. So then probably laterally, can involve all of the stakeholders to come to a commitment. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much. Let's get to the last question. This is actually, and Mike Mangold, you have to make it provocative, because some of the things that Mike is doing, I think, are a little bit out of the box. So your question, Mike, what are you going to ask Paul to put him on the spot?
Please.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Salman, for asking the question. So I am working actually in the area where we collaborate. I work for a biotech incubator, and I work for a digital health accelerator of Bayer Pharmaceuticals. So when we talked about how pharma could move into this new healthcare we're going to, what are the kind of example of big problems out there that we really have to focus on to solve, where pharma can win?
Let me just make sure I heard you correctly. What are the big problems that pharma companies need to focus on as a coalition? Are you saying, or just generally big problems?
Let's say you said we have to move out of the drug model, right, and find or the new revenues like Amazon, for instance. What are really the big problems out there where you believe that pharma can win and should move into?
I think that there's been huge progress in clinical trials as a result of the pandemic, providing digital tools and ability to do that. But I think that we still have so far to go when it comes to working as a coalition or working between us. There are so many more frameworks and standards that we could create together that would actually raise the tide for all. So much clinical trial cost is effectively reinventing the wheel, and poor recruitment ability, and the ability to, as I said before, work pre-medicine to understand patients and to maybe stratify them, understand them, segment them, so that clinical trial recruitment in the future becomes easier, is something that we could make huge gains on. I also think that we, on the pricing side, should be making a significant leap forward. I told everybody just a moment ago that we've got a little bit of a hiatus on the pricing side. It's not in the spotlight right now, and COVID-19 has given us that kind of breathing room. But I think that we are really short-sighted by how we do our pricing, and we really focus so much on increasing the short-term margin instead of increasing the long-term value, and I just think there's so much to be gained along there. I'm not actually sure I'm answering your question very well here, so let me know if you think I'm going along the right lines.
Oh, I love that. I wanted to have some specific example to think about in the next few days. So yeah, clinical trials, that's a trend I've seen, and I believe as well that we can solve that. And I love your example. And regarding collaboration, what is your I'm also very interested in open innovation, and there are many models, right? You can collaborate with big companies, with startups. You can outsource your scouting activities. What do you think is the best model at the moment for accelerating collaborations, alliances, and impact?
Sorry, can you just repeat the last part of the question again, as somebody tried to distract me, I have to confess, just as you were talking. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So we have many new open innovation models, right? You can form alliances with small or big companies, or outsource your activities to find new partnership. What do you think is one of the best ways today to make a collaboration a reality?
I think that starts by stating the challenge or the problem loudly and clearly. I don't think, as I said, our healthcare leaders ever talk about the future. This is a massive gap in what should be a responsibility of our leaders, to say this is the problem that we are trying to solve. And I don't think they do that. That's an essential part of any open innovation effort. The other thing I think is that we talked about patient centricity earlier. Patients are never considered as a source of innovation when it comes to open innovation as much as they should be. I think that Leo Pharma in Denmark is leading by example here, by actually enabling patients to come into the lab, the R&D lab, contribute skin samples. This is a dermatology-focused company, to actually use their own brains together to actually finding new compounds and new potentials. And I think that is a massive thing. And I also think that well, two more areas actually. I think that AI and open innovation have not formed the sort of collaboration that they should have done recently. AI, I think, can be far better deployed to look across various different open innovation opportunities and find, for example, where innovators have already got close to working in the problems that are trying to be solved and actually pull people together. And the final thing is, I think that the scientific community, the academic community, has great sort of networking at things like conferences, and it has obviously a system of academic papers. But conferences have just disappeared, and it's actually very difficult for the scientific community to come together to find out who's working on something before they've published anything on it. So I would love to see that there is some kind of social network or other independent way in which scientists can actually connect with each other to work on projects of like-minded nature. And so far, all of the open innovation initiatives have the potential to do that, but they've been quite specific to one company's issues. And so they haven't invested in such a phenomenon, which I think could be really transformative.
Well, Paul, on that note, that's where Basel Healthcare Drinks comes in, right?
Well, yeah. I don't know how many R&D people there are.
Well, there are a couple, and of course, we're trying to create a community which is open networking, which has no hierarchy and everything. On AI, by the way, before we sign off, because I'm conscious of time, we are actually approaching the 30 minutes that we said we will be overrunning. We have actually a colleague who has done a lot of work on AI. And this is none other than our Andre Bates. And we will have Andre talking about AI in pharma in one of the forthcoming talks. Paul, on behalf of Basel Healthcare Drinks and behalf, in fact, of HCD in the region globally, I'd like to thank you very much once again for a fascinating talk. I'm sorry a little bit about some of the technical hitches that we had in between, but I think the message came through very, very clearly. And and we look forward to having you in Basel when EasyJet starts flying again, so that you can actually come and visit us and actually do a face-to-face meeting with us. So once again, on behalf of everybody, thank you so much. And a special thank you to Christina from KPMG for facilitating this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Looking forward to having a drink with each and every one of you when the time makes that happen. So I've turned my video on just to say goodbye and thank you very much again.
Thank you so much, Paul. All
Bye,
the best.
Paul. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
Yes.